Danielle Carpino here of Humble Tree Homestead. As you can see, I got my hands full tonight. What we're gonna do is we're gonna transplant these plants that I was so graciously given by my friend Stacy over at the Buggirl on Red Mountain in Benton City, Washington. Seriously, you should go give them a look and see the awesome produce that they grow over there. They have plants as well. She gave me these because they're late in the season and they really need to get out of these pots. And so what I'm gonna show you is when you get plants later in the season, how to transplant them to give them the best success. Let's go. Next year we're going to be expanding our garden into this whole stretch through here. We've outgrown our garden space already and these new plants need to go in the ground. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work up a little space where we're eventually going to have a garden anyways, and we're going to cultivate this area so that those plants can grow in it. However, things haven't been growing, so the ground is extremely hard, and what we need to do is we need to rake it up a little bit to kind of aerate it, and then I'm going to go in and water it. So we just kind of want to scratch down a little bit on the surface of it, so that way it's just kind of loosening it up, because we have really clay soil here, and that makes it to where it's really hard for roots to grow in it, hard for water to penetrate correctly without puddling. And so this is going to help us to just kind of break up that ground that hasn't really had anything going on it. There's been a little bit of watering, but not very much. So I'm just going to go ahead and rake this out, and I'll have you guys join me as soon as I get this section raked up. As you can see, I loosely raked everything, trying to break it up, and that is kind of how I'm prepping this, because this is going to be the base, kind of where the roots start to grow. So I kind of want to aerate it and get it to where there's at least a little bit of looseness to the soil. Right now I'm just trying to get this ground wet, so that way it's not just the compost that's wet, but this is actually starting to seep into the ground below and help those plants take root into the soil as well. We have really thick clay soil here, and as you can see, the water is pooling and it's not really draining into the soil. This is why I'm working really hard to amend the soil here by adding compost to add nutrients to it. And then also I usually go over with a mulch that is a conditioner mulch for clay soil, because this is going to be a problem. That means that water is not penetrating deep into this bed space, and once roots start to grow in there, it'll help a little bit. But at first I'm going to have to make sure that I'm really watering this well, so that water is getting this area moist and it's not so hydrophobic anymore, and it won't just repel water and puddle at the top. As you can see, it does seep in. It just takes a long time because there's nothing that has been growing in this ground. So when water has gotten added to it, it just compacts and gets so much more dense and hard for things to penetrate through it. One thing I want to do whenever I am transplanting plants, especially later in the season like this, is I want to look at the plant and see what it's telling me that it needs. This plant is clearly root bound. In addition to it, that means that it's probably lacking some nutrients, and I can tell that by looking at it, because the plant is a much paler green on the leaves. If you look at the new growth, the leaves are nice and green. These are more of a yellowing. They're starting to dry up. That tells me that it is lacking nitrogen. Nitrogen is what helps your plant to grow vegetation. And so I know, because I have soil that's lacking in that already, I need to make sure to put a fertilizer on that ground that is high in nitrogen along with the compost, because we're so late in season that I'm wanting to help this plant as much as I possibly can to get something out of it before the season is over. You do not want to over fertilize when you're doing this. You want to just be adding a little bit of fertilizer, because we are going in over that fertilizer and putting compost, which is high in nutrients. But that layer of fertilizer that's going on the ground that is already existing is going to seep into that a lot faster and help that soil out, where this plant will be planted in the compost, and it will actually help the plant until those roots go into that soil. So we're kind of preemptively treating the ground where the roots are going to go during the time that the plant is growing in the compost. I just have a handful and I'm just kind of sprinkling it over. Like I said, you don't want to have a ton of fertilizer in that space, because we are going in with compost. We don't too much of a good thing is also not a good thing. So we just want to make sure that we are just helping that soil get a little bit of nutrients in it while the compost is aiding the plant. So then when the roots get down there, that is going to be all ready for those roots to be received. Now that I've fertilized this whole area, every time you fertilize, you want to make sure that you're watering that fertilizer in. It starts to break down the fertilizer, starts to send it into the soil, and it will also help that fertilizer not burn your roots or your leaves or your plant. So you just want to do a little bit of water over the entire area that you fertilize to water that fertilizer in. Because again, too much of a good thing is a bad thing. So we do want to make sure that we're just giving it a little bit of water to start breaking the fertilizer down, getting it into the soil where we want it. So now I'm going to go in with a compost. I use organic compost. As you can see, this one says breaks up hard clay soil. Clay soil is what we have. Perfect. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to give this a nice layer of compost, so that way this soil becomes more nutrient rich. It's going to start breaking up that clay. It's going to start preparing this as good soil. You want to make sure that you're adding compost, at least a thin layer, every year to your garden to help rebuild that ecosystem, to rebuild what your plants took out of it the year prior, and just give back to the earth more than you take from it. And you're going to see the difference of compost. See how it is so dark. That is the richness versus your dirt over here that is brown. There's a huge difference in the nutrition of what you're putting down. Black soil is a good thing. That is where the nutrients are. That is what you want for a growing space. So I'm just going to go through, lay it down, spread it out, and do this whole area so that we get some nice good nutrients. I'm going to go a little bit deep. I'm going to kind of go up to the edge of my blocks without going over, because I do want to go in with a mulch after I have everything laid down. But for right now, I'm going to go kind of probably a little, like 3/4 of the way up my stones that I have here, and just get this bed prepared for what I'm about to grow in it. As you can see, the huge color difference between fertilized ground and poor nutrient deficient ground. I got 3 more basil plants today, so I'm going to plant these at the end of the row. We pruned them and made them ready to be put in the ground. You can see the video. It's a short video on how to do that for beginners. We're going to put these into the ground, and what I usually do is I just kind of take my pot and I make a little indentation where I want those plants to go. So then I know where to dig and how big of a space I'm gonna need to put this plant into. So then I'm gonna go in and I'm just gonna dig up the ground. Again, I told you guys this is really hard ground. So I'm gonna dig it up, making it deep enough for those roots in the root ball. I am going to take that plant and just loosely break up the end roots so that way they kind of can start going throughout the soil, and place that in the hole and cover it back up. And I'm going to do that with the rest of these plants, and I will usually go in and prune off the very bottom leaves of the plant that I just planted, so that way it helps the plant to resist diseases from too much water being on a leaf. It just kind of helps keep it off of that soil and keeps that plant in the best health it can possibly be in. Now we're going to go in and plant this summer squash. This one will go inside of a tomato cage because I'm training everything to go up this year, and I'm going to try a tomato cage for this one versus a T-post, see what method I like better. So same method as before. I want to make sure that I'm giving it enough space because it's a pretty decent sized tomato cage and the leaves will shoot out of it, so I don't want to crowd my basil I don't want to crowd the fence. I don't want to crowd the grass line. So I'm going to go about halfway in and do the same thing I was showing you guys with the basil. And what I do when I am taking out the soil in that space is I'll take the plant out of its pot. I'll dig up that whole area, put it inside this pot, and once it's full, I now know that I have enough dug out for that plant to fit back in there. So I'm going to scoop the compost aside so I'm not losing that compost. And then I'll just dig in until that pot is to the depth that it was before I started. I'm going in with my bone meal, which is potassium and phosphorus, and I'm just going to put a bit in, like about half of a tablespoon into the hole before I plant my plant, because I'm also wanting this plant to set on more blossoms and produce more. In addition to that, it will help the plant grow more too. So it's going to really help that plant to take off, especially since we're so late in this season. And we're just breaking up those roots like before, setting that into the hole that has been prepared for it, and pushing that compost back over it. Kind of spreading it out like so. So what I want to do is I want to come in and cut off any of that dry leaves that were growing on here. The reason I want to do that is because those are taking up nutrients from this plant, and we are trying to give this plant as much of a chance to grow as possible. So we want to take all those dry leaves off, and then any of these leaves that are yellowing and starting to dry up, we want to go in and clip those off right at the base, making sure that we're not cutting that main stem. We're just cutting right down to that main stem. The reason why is we're taking those nutrients from those stems that are really not doing great, and we're putting it back into the plant that we're wanting to grow. Plus, with me doing this in a tomato cage and growing it upwards instead of outwards, I start training it to do this anyways by cutting off all that bottom growth, besides for the ones that are by the fruit that's on there. Now, I also am going to, even though this has a fruit on it, I'm also going to cut that off because we are wanting that nutrition to help this plant start establishing and growing before it starts putting its energy into the actual plant or the actual fruit on the plant. So I'm just going to cut off any of those that were on there. It's sad to do that, but long haul you'll get more production out of this plant if you do it, because the nutrients that it takes to grow a fruit is far more than the nutrients it takes to grow an entire plant. And so you don't want to take away the nutrition that this plant is needing to help establish, grow, and actually get something out of it, especially since we're late in the season. We want to give it the best shot that it possibly has to produce. Okay, so we got that tomato cage around it. We want to make sure that it is at least close to the ground, that it can kind of support this plant as it goes teeter-tottering. I'll probably put a stake in here too to just kind of help that plant learn to grow up instead of outwards like it's been doing in a pot. You can also put gardener's tape around it when you do the stake. It's just to help it learn what direction you're going to want to go. As these leaves grow out, they'll start to help that plant stay stabilized, but right now it's been growing out of a plot and now we're training it to grow up. So that is what you want to do. You want to make sure that a good portion of it is supported within that cage. If it is not, make sure you're putting a stake so that it's learning to grow straight up. And that is how we are treating this plant. New day, ran out of light, but we're going to dig up this hole so that we can plant the 2 pumpkin plants. We have a white pumpkin plant and we have one of those little orange pumpkin plants that we're going to plant here. I pushed all of my compost to the side like I was telling you earlier, and we're just digging out that hole. You want to make sure that you're always getting it wide enough for that plant to fit into. And I usually try to kind of stab the soil underneath of it and loosen it up a little bit. So when the roots are first starting to grow, they're not fighting to try to get through the soil. They kind of have a little bit of looseness under there until they establish in the ground, and then they can start pushing through the soil. Okay, so since these plants are later and they are blooming plants, we want to make sure that we are putting some phosphorus and potassium, aka bone meal, into that hole, and I just kind of work it into the soil a little bit. And this is going to help give those roots some strength. It's going to help give the plant strength, but it will also help that plant to produce more blossoms, so we have more chances of actually getting pumpkins off of them, even though it's later in the season. I've already cut off all my dead leaves like I was showing you guys earlier, breaking those roots up just a little bit, and I want them to go the direction I want the plants to go. So we're just going to kind of plant that where we want it, and we're going to push that compost back over it. And since this is kind of going that way, we'll put a stake here, and it'll guide it to go the other direction. And once it's strong enough, it'll know what way I want it to go. But right now it's been growing in a pot, and you just gotta kind of teach it the way that you want it to go. Okay, so we're just gonna go in, and with one of these little garden bamboo sticks, just kind of teach that plant that we're wanting it to grow this way. See how that one's already going that way? Instead of it going towards the fence, it now is going the direction I want. As it starts to grow and get used to its space, it'll already do that. But since it's been in a pot growing its own way, we gotta just kind of give it a little guidance and show it, hey, this is the way I want you to go. I have this theory that Mother Earth likes to be covered. You'll notice that if you look at my garden, I have very densely packed beds. And the reason for this I will discuss a little further in detail down the road in another video. But what I'm going to do is, in this bed, I'm going to go through and I'm going to lay in some black oil sunflower seeds. I'm just randomly sprinkling them throughout. I can come in and thin them out if I need to. I don't know how many of them will grow, but my thoughts with the sunflowers is, A, they bring in pollinators if they have time, but if not, what's going to happen is it's going to allow those stalks, which get nice and big, to help really kind of break up and aerate this ground, which we know is a problem with this ground. It's not ideal. So having those big stalks forming and growing roots out, because the roots get deep and they go far and the stalk is really good, it's going to help prepare this bed for the following year. So we're going to just go in, and like I said, I'm sprinkling in those sunflower seeds just randomly throughout. I can go and thin it out if they come in, and what comes in. I'm also going to go in with marigold seeds, take my dried up flowers off of my marigolds, and I'm just sprinkling those around. Great pest deterrent. They have many medicinal uses. They're edible. Pollinators love them. Insects hate them. They are your garden's best friend. So we're just going to go in and kind of sprinkle that throughout. Again, trying to cover it. For one, it'll help with moisture retention, but also it's going to help get the ground to where it has roots growing throughout it. It hasn't had anything growing throughout it for a while, and we're just trying to help it out. So then what I do is I just kind of go in and loosely rake it with a hand rake to kind of get those seeds to go below the surface of the compost, and then it'll have a better chance of germinating. If there's any big clumps, I'll go ahead and just kind of hit them with the rake to kind of break those clumps up. And I'm just going to do that throughout this whole bed. Every time that you transplant a plant, you want to make sure that you water it in, especially when you're using fertilizers and things as well. Just make sure that you're giving it a good water. We're going to go back in and go over with a mulch, but I want to make sure that the soil underneath is moist before I put that mulch on. So I'm just going to give it a little water, kind of set everything into place, and then we will go in with the mulch. the mulch that I've been using this year. It's a soil building conditioner. It helps to break up hard clay soils. I've already noticed a difference in my garden space with it really helping to improve the ground underneath of it. In addition to that, it's going to help keep your weeds down, and it will also help to keep moisture in your bed as well. It'll help to prevent your soil from splashing up on your plant and causing rot on your leaves as well. So I'm sure you can find other things out there. This is just what we've gone with. So what I do is I just kind of put a big pile in an open space that's kind of centrally located, and then I'll just go in and spread that throughout the bed. Get it right up on those plants. You want it all over the whole ground, not just around your plants, about an inch thick. In addition, this mulch is going to help cover all those seeds that I laid down and help them to germinate as well. We've finished off this bed, and we'll take a look down and you can see how nice it looks. And you want to water that mulch down now. This is going to help it to kind of settle in. It's going to help so that it's not sucking moisture out of your already moistened compost. You want to make sure that you're getting it off of all your surfaces onto the bed. And then as you can see here, I got it onto the plant. So we just want to make sure that we are washing that off, because that can burn the plant and you don't want that to happen. So we just wash it off like that, just rinse it off. Make sure that you're getting this nice and moist, so that way it is providing moisture for your plants and isn't going to get evaporated. And hopefully these plants will turn around and look lovely in a week's time and start to establish in this ground. Sometimes they'll look a little bit worse before they look better, and that's just because they're going through a shock of being moved from the pot that they've been in for a while into a new living environment. Their roots have been a little disrupted, so it's okay if for a couple of days it looks a little less desirable than you want it to look. It will turn around. Just make sure that you're keeping it well watered and tending to it like you normally would your plants. And we'll wait a week's time before we edit this video together for you. That way I can show you in a week's time what this garden looks like, and you can kind of see the progress from right now to a week from now and what these plants have done, and if we've been able to successfully transplant them and give them a new thriving environment. It has been a week since we planted out this bed, and I wanted to show you guys the progress that we have made in a week's time in this. So we have the 3 basil plants are nice and full and definitely getting to where they're going to produce a good yield for us. That summer squash, look at the color of the leaves, so much healthier. And you'll see down there we have new blossoms that are growing on there. The plant has grown itself. It looks so much healthier than it did when we started planting it out. You'll notice little tiny things that are popping up. These are probably the marigolds. We have a ton of sunflowers throughout this bed that are popping up, and I'm going to thin them out. But I want to explain to you what my theory was with that. So right here, you can see this is the main taproot that is going to go down, and then you have all these roots that go off to the sides. These are going to grow really wide. They'll grow to be about this wide. That's going to help to break down that really tough clay soil and aerate this so that next year we will actually have a much better growing space, because roots will be able to access and move throughout it a lot easier than if we hadn't done that. I will have to go through and thin them because they're kind of close, and I still want to be able to make sure that things can grow throughout here. When things grow, they get this first set of leaves, which is their first 2 leaves. Those aren't real leaves. The secondary leaves, which are the ones that are right there in the center, those are the true leaves. Those are the first leaves that are going to set on the plant as the plant. They're not your primary photosynthesis ones that help the plant to grow. Those are the true set of leaves. So you're gonna see through here, we have quite a few sunflowers that have popped up. I'm gonna let them grow for a little bit, aerate the ground some, and then I'll thin them out a little bit so that way they can actually grow and I'll get some sunflowers off of them. And then we have the pumpkins over here. You can see that they are looking so much better in color as well. The blossoms are looking really good. Right here, we have some new ones. We had that. It's been setting blossoms. I haven't had any females yet, but I am getting males, which you can just see the plants look so much healthier. I hope that you find this video inspiring and encourages you to give it a try, to go out there and find plants that are on death row and not feel like it's too late in the season, you can't grow anything else. Make sure that you're finding varieties of things that you know will have time to grow. For example, out there, summer squash, it still has enough time to develop. The skin is soft. Once they actually set onto the plant, they grow pretty fast. It's a pretty quick turnaround time. Same with the pumpkins. I got little pumpkins because I had a feeling that they'll still have time to develop and ripen in time before the season is over. Think about the plants that you're getting. Think about their purpose and how big they get. And will that have enough time in your growing season? Our growing season's a little longer than most here in Washington State, Zone 7, because we have heat a little bit longer than most people do. We have technically until October to be growing things in our garden before our first frost even hits. Think about your zone. Think about when your first frost date is, and then look up that plant and see if you have time to get anything off of it. Or you can even just do like I did, where you plant it in the ground to try to turn around your soil for the following season. A lot of times I like to get my plants off of death row. They are significantly less expensive. Oftentimes they just are root bound, need some nutrients, need to be put in real soil and have a little tending to them. And they thrive just like any other plant. Most of the basil in my garden, the alyssum, all my fillers in my garden were all done off of death row, as I call it. The ones that are destined for the garbage can, so they're not gonna make it if I don't take them home. But I have really found that that is a affordable way to fill in a garden space. A lot of times they do grow and they do thrive. Just pay attention to the plant. Turn it over. Look if the roots are really coming out of the bottom. You know it's root bound, which can be amended by breaking up those roots before you plant them. Pay attention to the plant and see if it's really looking like there's any green on there or if it looks completely dry. If it looks completely dry, chances are that is going to be a really hard plant to turn around. If you're seeing even just the slightest bits of green on it, there is hope for that plant, and a lot of times just putting them in the ground, watering them and fertilizing them will actually give you a very healthy plant. It might take a little longer than buying this beautiful plant that is already green and lush, but you're getting it a lot cheaper and you can actually fill in your garden space a lot better when you're doing it that way. So I hope that this encourages you. I hope that you are inspired to just give it a whirl and try and see if you can get another harvest off of something in a space that you may have just had sitting around and doing nothing for you. I also hope that you learned a little bit, if you're dealing with clay soil, on how to amend that and help it to turn around so that you can start having good soil for roots to grow in. Until next time, you guys, I hope that you have a great week, and remember that from humble beginnings, mighty things can grow if we just tend to them. Love you guys. Have a good week. Bye. Hey everyone, Danielle Kurt. You said something.
I was gonna see. Right.
Hey everyone, and these are late season. No, sounds weird. Okay, hold on a second. Hey everyone, as you can see, wait. Hey everyone, so I'm going to transplant these friends. These friends. That's Hey, everyone.
Let me just.